I think one of the most important things is that we are to recognize when we're talking about timelines and what it means to be a facilitator of the subsidiary timeline is the fact that timelines are energy. They are code streams and they are made up of different forms of information systems. We have been taught that timelines kind of, if we work with the Einsteinian sciences and science fiction movies, that timelines denotes or determines reality. And in a way they do, and in a way they don't. Let us play a little bit with the idea of the artificial timelines that we have been part of and the main timeline. So what does it do? Does it actually tailor reality? No, but it controls the neural networks and the consciousness potentials of the one that are attached to that code stream of the global main timeline of chaos and entropy. It's important to kind of grasp that reality is formed after the collective. That means that the world we have looks as it does because this is how we perceive it. This is how we've been taught that it looks. And you can ask, well, how is that done? Well, first and foremost, there are limitations to the perception field of all beings that are born into this reality. It is limited to the electromagnetic spectrum, and I've talked about this many times, but I'll recap it here a little bit so you really get the understanding of what it means to be on the subsidiary timeline. So the main timeline is working in the way that the collective have decided. And in that way, what I mean is we have children that have specific possibilities within the neural networks. Children are born with a lot of neurons that are fresh and ready to receive information. Then due to parents, circumstances, environments, things that are happening around them, as well as DNA markers and already what we call locked in potentials of the different types of possibilities that the cellular level can unfold into that physical form, be it due to karma or be it due to what we could call more psychosomatic tendencies, whatever that means. Then the child will be exposed to experiences of reality. The ones that are the main tailors of the child's perception of reality are the parents and the people, the primary caretakers who is around the child, whether it's parents or grandparents or neighbors or what it is, whoever is having the child and can make impressions on the child's mind and explain this is what the world is. We don't know technically if a child sees the lawn as green, but once it begins to explore, we tell it it's green. We know from children, from boys who have got color blindness, they are seeing colors differently. So they perceive the world differently, even though that they are in it and they operate like the rest of us. They're just seeing it differently, and it's unexplainable. You can't really explain it. Explain the color green, explain the color red. You can't really. But you can say, this is what we have decided as a collective, that this is how the lawn looks like. If our cells in the eyes are tailored differently, as in color blindness, we see differently with a different color. And so with everything around us. So it's a consensus-based reality. That's important to grasp. So if we are thinking about that, the majority of the human population, or at least the ones that had a stronger type of consciousness potential, would exhibit a different type of reality view and were mirroring that or projecting that into their perception field, and if that impacted reality around us, the world would change. Quite simple. So that is the battle of the timelines. The timelines are the energy units that fuels the three lower fields as well as what is to be perceived of this reality. So you can say the code streams of reality are technically the program that humans are tapping into, and then they're expressing this program in different ways that is in alignment with their potentials. And these potentials are defined by past life experiences, karma, if you like, and other sorts of limitations, which I've talked about in the multidimensional progressive sciences, where we go into what's behind the physical reality and what impacts the physical reality. So in that way, we can say that if we had the opportunity to change the general timeline or the main timeline as a collective, which has been the race that we have been in, well, then this world would have looked different, and we would altogether be working in different ways. And these are some of the things that I'm contemplating on a little bit today, as in, what if the subsidiary timeline had become the main timeline? So again, when we talk about the subsidiary timeline, the code streams there, the energy units and the code streams, the information system, the complex information systems that are part of the subsidiary timeline, which we can connect to via our developed consciousness potentials that are integrated into the human brain, that then has learned to operate on what we call different types of energy settings beyond the limited enclosure program, are capable of embedding these different types of codes into the neural network, and by that begin to exemplify different ways of perceiving reality, including different ways of conceptualizing reality. And in that way, perhaps if we are really working hard for it, can generate different types of material that we can produce, whether it is gadgets, physical material, or inventions, or art, or books, or whatever we are producing, or educations, etc. But most of the time, unfortunately, what we are limited to producing are what we call in the soft inventions, and these goes with thought forms, teachings, sciences, educations, art, yes, but there are limitations due to the physicality of this reality, and onward and so forth. So there are limitations to how far we can push the higher order awareness and the multidimensional complex information system into fruition in this reality. And that's one of the reasons why the Inner Earth tried the externalization the last time at the first run through, because they hoped that they would come in with that momentum that foundationally would ground in the original fourth dimension. And that failed spectacularly. So in that way, that did never happen, and they just got ingrained and their potentials were taken from them. Which leads me to this lifetime. Since 2012, my awareness has been released from these prohibiting technologies, and alongside with the main astral barrier and frequency fence that has collapsed as part of the colonizing races, and that has released portions of my higher order awareness to be integrated into the physical form. Has that changed my reality around me? No. Has that changed the way I perceive reality? Yes. Has that changed the way I perceive the base program? No, because that's still a collective timeline. So that's what does it then mean that it's a chaos entropy timeline? And as explained in the text material, it means that the energy systems that are connected to this timeline, that are getting information systems, the complex information systems activated in their energy system, they will run on ideas and paradigms and thought forms and conceptualization of reality that foster, that bridges, that gives access to, that allows for chaos and entropy, that allows for things to go into a disordered state of reality, whatever that means. A hurricane is a kind of a disorder. It breaks down things, it destroys things, and then you can say, well, new things can grow from that. And that's how it's been so far. Whenever something broke down, part of nature would heal, and then it would recalibrate itself, and something new would come up, or something else would come in its place. And to some degree, it probably still will, because nature changes so slowly that we barely notice the changes. But over time, if we remember it, and that's where the mind wiping comes in inside the enclosure, because that's the tool they're using now, as in we remember there's been a hurricane and we then are programmed, or the ones on the main timeline are then programmed to perceive it within the spectrum of, oh yeah, this is how it's always been. So in that way, even though there are 3 hurricanes in a row, only the ones that are awake and are not being what we call controlled by the base program, they are seeing it as in, okay, there were these 3 hurricanes and they were actually different. As you might recall, for a long time with UFOs/UAPs, was that people were seeing it in the sky and 2 seconds later they forgot it. So this is how they're going to administer the main timeline. Things will happen. It will be talked about. It will be written in the newspaper. It's been like that for forever, except from those of us who have continuation of memory. And we can remember, yeah, that has happened before, that has happened before, that has happened before. This is just slightly different, but it has happened before. Whereas the general population that's been mind wiped, for them each time it's a new big disaster, new big something. And that will produce fear, that will produce a sense of chaos, that will produce this perception of reality being unstable. And that's how they're going to play in the chaos entropy timeline potentials into this reality. So in that way, those of us who are on the subsidiary timeline, we are working with coherence, we are working with balance points, and we are working with the general perception that things are not in chaos, that things are not going into complete entropy, that things are continuing however form that they might take. I can definitely see in reality and nature, as you can as well, that it is not in a good state. We can definitely see that nature is having its issues. Trees are not what they used to be. Things are growing out their form, so to speak. Plants are exponentially growing taller than they normally did. There are these things where you can say, well, the original pattern is no longer functional, is it? It's not really working anymore as it's supposed to or as it used to. So that's for those of us who have memory continuation. We can see that things are changing and we remember how it used to be. And of course, memory can be deceptive. We know that. People remember things differently. But there are certain things where you can say, well, for me, instance, as in when I was a child, there were no roses that were blossoming in December. Here in the island, we got roses that are blossoming now here in December. That is unheard of. Plus, we had mosquitoes into the first week of December. Mosquitoes are normally gone at the end of September and onward and so forth. We got species up here that normally isn't there. So all of these are a type of chaos entropy, meaning that the original order of our nature is being broken down, and we can call it weather modification, or we can call it that the weather patterns are changing. And with that, there are migration of insects and insect behavior changes, etc. And that kind of goes with the change of the pattern of reality that then leads to changes in behavior of insects, changes in behavior of nature, and changes in the behavior of the overall weather patterns and the weather dynamics. So that's one way where we can see that the reality program is breaking down. And that's very important to grasp that and really get that understanding and not just go into the denial mindset or the gloss over mindset that says, yeah, there's always been changes. No, we have some profound changes now that are unheard of. And of course, we have had similar events earlier on, and that's where the different types of the program actually broke down but was repaired. The difference is this time around, there is no technology to repair it. So we'll continue to break down, and that will create different types of environmental changes that we have yet to understand what that actually is and what that actually means. The same goes with the imprint or the pattern of water. that used to be in a specific spectrum due to the colonial programs and their technology. Since that technology is no longer there, then the water pattern will change. And that means we will have to change behavior in the way we are working, accessing and handling drinking water, including precipitation, snow, rain, whatever comes from above, the way the cloud formations, the way the clouds are. We've seen that because as well as also of the weather modification programs, the water that comes from the sky has changed. Snowflakes are different. We have experienced some of this. Some of them were super heavy snow. I remember or recall one winter 6 or 7 years ago, perhaps even further back. Can't remember when. Perhaps it was 2017 or something. But the snow that fell was so heavy that branches of the trees broke off. And in my entire life, even though that the snow has been lying thick on the branches, it has always been light. It has always been like this. Yes, when it's very wet and when it goes into what we call kind of defrosting, then it becomes heavy. But the snow, when it normally is that heavy, then it's this kind of sludge thing that just falls on the ground and then doesn't really stick on the trees. But here was acting like normal snow sticking on the trees, but at the same time it was super heavy because it was super wet or whatever. I felt like there were metals in it because the trees broke, the branches broke. And that was a kind of unusual behavior of snow and how snow normally operates. So all of these things, those of us who have memory continuation, we can recall these things and see the pattern. Whereas the rest of the ones on the main timeline, they will be mind wiped and they will not connect the dots. We can try and yell it to them, similarly with the crisscrossing on the sky. It is so amazing. I've been trying to talk to people in the base program. Can you see the crisscrossing in the sky? And they're saying, oh, it's just contrails. And then you're saying, but see how it spreads out? Oh, no, I can't see that. And it's there, right there in front of them, how it spreads out. But they don't have the ability to continue looking at it and connecting that information in their brain as this is unusual. This is not normal. They have been reprogrammed that this is normal. This is how it is. I even watched movies where you are having contrails on the sky and things that are lingering on and whatever. That's part of the background of the movies. Whereas when I grew up, it was the blue sky. That was normal, right? But not anymore. So these are the changes of reality on the entropy, chaos, entropy timeline. So the patterns will begin to break down. And that means that nature will slowly but surely changes and it will not repair itself as it normally does. It will go into these fluctuations as it always has. But each time there will be this momentum of change that eventually become critical, and then instead of going back into balance, it will begin to spiral off into more and more imbalance, from where we go into entropy. So that's that understanding that the chaos dynamics are a sign of the ordered patterns that normally can recalibrate themselves into a specific balance point, no longer can balance itself and therefore will go out of balance. How does that affect us? Well, that's what I'm saying. This is the preparation. It's actually when we talk about the prepping and everybody's talking about, oh yeah, we might have some future, whatever disaster coming with humans that are going into some stupid mindset that want to war each other or whatever they're doing. And that is of course always a potentiality because the human race has done that again and again and again. It's kind of specific groups within humanity that enjoys that kind of existence, and it is important for them. So that is, of course, always lurking beneath the surface. But for those of us who live in countries where war is not something that's on the table on an everyday basis, and it's not something that we turn to as the first solution for any crisis within society or governmental structures, solutions are to be built on what we call democracy and bureaucracy, and in that way found solutions on a governmental level. And I don't give much to that because the patterns of governance are also breaking down. These were all part of the old colonizing programs of the 410 pillar of governance, administered within specific lineages of our society. But as we have seen in the last 20, 30 years, the ones that are now in the political institutions, they have very little to do with these lineages, and most of them are barely educated or have any understanding of what politics actually is, and are trying to run our society as a kind of a business. And in a way, it has been for a long time. I've said that. I realized that when I was 13, that this is not about ideology. This is about household financial economy. That is all about resource allocation or financial allocation into different things we find important. So the question is, what do we find important and what do we want to throw money after? And right now, we are loading off a lot of money to something in Eastern Europe that should not in any ways or forms be part of whatever we are doing. Anyways, that I'm not going to go into that one. I'm just saying there are the solutions that our governments are choosing right now will lead to more chaos. They are not choosing the solutions that minimize chaos. They are choosing solutions that propagate chaos. And that is also important to understand, so that when we do look at the governmental structures, we are not resting our hope upon them and saying, oh, they will find solutions to everything. So that goes into whenever there's a high level of chaos, people retract to their homes and their own circles and what is close to them, which is something that they can take care of and that they actually can control. And in that way, it is understandable, which we have seen throughout human societies as well. When different structures begin to break down, nobody really stands up to prevent it from breaking down. People are retracting and taking care of their own business. And that's why certain systems can come in play that are very disruptive. And in a way, when we talk about the future governmental forces that are on the main timeline, as well as the way societies are built up and the major cities and all of these things, the disruptive forces, let's just call it that, and people who prefer disruption will be the one in power. They will be the ones that runs the businesses, and they will be run by greed and service to self. So it's just that simple, that once we hit that level where the energy systems are no longer being fueled by what we say in the old world order, there was a lot of things that didn't work. But one thing the colonizing species had as a main objective was that to some degree they had to collaborate, because there were many different species on this planet that were part of the colonizing factions, and they had to learn to work together to some degree, which did not always work within wars and rise and fall of civilizations, etc., because of these species and their inter-factional disputes and wars and whatever has been going on. But overall, once a year, we had the Niburians coming in, taking care of their factions, and the other time of the year, the Dracos would come in and clean out the ones that had not followed the overarching rule set of these two major groups of the D10 collective. So they would come in and clean up. And I remember these cleanup processes every year, normally around December 21st, which is interesting, going into the dark levels. That's where the night crawlers and the critters from the underworld would surface and draw souls in that belonged there, even within people that were still alive. It happens when you're alive. It doesn't happen when you die. It happens while you're living, that you get these pull-ins, so that eventually, once you die, then whatever was left of the original holographic template or whatever was there of genetics have then been, throughout your lifetime, due to all the choices, been connected more and more to the timelines and the reality field constructions that are part of the older types of civilizations and timelines that have been in play in our reality. And that's that. Then when the physical form then is no longer there, then whatever's left will then be drawn to these older, that's past Earth type of configuration, where they will then continue and be quote unquote re-established into some kind of holographic energetic vessel, whatever that means. or become as the anchor point inside this reality, some weird critter in the soil. So that's kind of where when we talk about the Hindu understanding of reincarnation, is not completely far off. The only thing that is far off is that they always say once you go into hell, you become this angry ghost. You can always come back if you change the way in hell. But once you connect to the fallen earth, the past earth, and phantom earth, there is no escape. You're stuck there until you burn out. So that's that one. Then there are the other side of where you, throughout your lifetime in the colonial programs, could work your way into being reborn inside the enclosure. But the whole working to get out of the enclosure, we know that has been a very, very little group that have achieved that, and a very, very little group that's been granted that, mostly because they're factions that were part of the colonizing species and the projects inside of here chose to pull out, and with that pull out the souls of the ones that were inserted into human forms inside the base program. So there are these, and I know this sounds very dire and bleak and not particularly what you have been taught. But that is the case to the largest degree when we talk about the extraterrestrial colonial programs. And then there, of course, are the future humans that ends up in that disastrous future that have been traveling back. How much did they actually have of these different extraterrestrial genetic lineages in their energy systems? Little to none. You see, this is where it's interesting, because on the main timeline, which we're seeing now, it's playing out again. All of the extraterrestrial groups are pulled out. All the extraterrestrial programs have been shut down. Everything that's been going on here has been retracted and closed down. And then it's just technically the biofield, emotional field, mental field with the astral plane and the mental plane configuration lingering on. And that's the astral plane is the artificial fourth. It bridges into the artificial fourth. The astral plane is the distortion that connects the emotional field to the artificial fourth. And then you have the mental field that bridges into the human brain, and that's the distortion field into the artificial fifth. And that continues. So the ones in the future, they're connected to the artificial fourth and artificial fifth dimension, and the different groups that chose to remain because they couldn't go off planet. They couldn't leave. So these are the groups we're talking about in the future. But they are, per energy signature, completely human. In the 3 Earth theory, I'm pointing at some of the sciences of the future that they exhibited to be able to travel back. And that still stands. We still have 3 Earths, all depending on what type of Earth we do. We still have Phantom Earth. We still have past or fallen Earth. That's Phantom Earth. That's connected to all of the timelines that did not make it and are part of the third cycle. We still have the underworld as part of our planet. That's all of the reality fields and the lineages and the timelines that are part of the past civilizations within the Holocene. That still stand. We still have the current reality of the base program in the now as it is. That's always a transition. That's always something that can transition into either Phantom Earth or past Earth, or Phantom Earth again is the version of Earth that's in the third cycle, and past Earth is what's part of the previous civilizations and within the Holocene. That's the last 15,000 years. And then we have the current civilizations that are struggling with not being sucked into either the abyss, aka Phantom Earth, or the past version of Earth, aka the underworld, and then the current civilizations that are recalibrating as an Ouroboros inside the current reality field. Now on 2 timelines, either the main one that leads to chaos and entropy in future Earth, or the one that leads to the subsidiary timeline, from where we get into the safe zones and leave this reality field altogether. And that goes with all of the teachings. It sounds very much like Christianity, Buddhism, whatever. You do your enlightenment process, you do your deeds, you work the right way, and then you come into heaven, aka safe zone, or you get enlightened, aka you leave the enslavement programs, etc., etc. It's been taught all along. It's just the way you look into it, and then it's been made into religions due to the deception programs of the old world order species and the colonizing groups. So they were playing this artificial. We are still allowing to be some kind of progression science there, but it's an Ouroboros. It leads to absolutely nowhere. That's the rabbit holes in the astral plane that we were led into. And if we go through that one, led into the artificial fourth, where virtual reality scenarios then play out and get us into all sorts of weird thought forms. So that's part of the breakdown of the higher order energy system as they are connected to these artificial programs, which is why I keep telling again and again and again. If you even just are to leave the main timeline, then these programs must be cleared out and administered on a daily basis, because we get sucked back in. So it's important to understand that the artificial fourth and artificial fifth are part of the main timeline. So even though you are on the main timeline with chaos and entropy, and you're having multidimensional awareness experiences, they can still be part of the deception technologies. They can still be virtual reality, part of the main timeline of whatever remains of the future factions of the fifth dimensional level, aka the Atlantean and military projects, or what's left of the fourth dimension, aka android transhuman future that comes from the parallel universal matrix, of which they will pull out their organic vessels later on, and what will be left would be the android technology. So the booklet of the three Earths theory still stands, because that's the future I'm talking from. It's always been from that future. And we've been trying to build a secondary or subsidiary timeline that would allow us to disconnect altogether from present Earth, because present Earth is going to be merged with past Earth and then be sucked into phantom Earth. And that's where that everything begins to extinguish, when our sun has extinguished as well. So everything still stands. Nothing has changed. Everything I have been making as material has been a kind of a step towards this, the attempt to try and create the subsidiary timeline, to make it become the main timeline, which we now know, as everything else did not work out. Because there is this resistance, because there's the mind wiping, because humanity at large are in denial, are not interested in changing their ways of perceiving reality. It takes too much. And even if all of you that have done this work, you've studied material, you have done all of these kind of things, just notice how quickly you realign with the base program. So the double awareness should always be there. And I have that all the time. I have the multidimensional aspect of everything, but that does not change reality. It just gives me a different perception of it. And that's kind of the understanding as well with the timelines, including the energy work in your timeline, as in what timeline do you choose, but also what are the genetic potentials for what timeline. If your genetic potentials of past lives are more in alignment with the main timeline, then that's where you will be situated. Even though you have multidimensional awareness, you will still do the cleansing of your timelines on the main timeline. You will still struggle with the artificial fourth and fifth on the main timeline. Just because you're struggling with the past timelines and what you have been, and you have multidimensional awareness, does not mean you're off the main timeline. It just means you're still in the artificial fourth and fifth dimension. So the subsidiary timeline is where you get a completely different mindset and perspective of reality that connects to inner Earth and the Andromeda future technology. And that group is so small that we'll be able to see this. And at the same time, you are also to be very much aware of deception programs. Because if you're still in the main timeline, you are still under the protection, quote unquote. You're still under the surveillance and the impression of different types of fourth dimensional drone technology that reach your mind and feels all the time. And by that, if you begin to study this material and you give it the cues like AI, you give it the cue of inner Earth, and then it begins to produce a whole pattern for you that makes you believe that, oh yeah, I got connection to inner Earth. And I still ask myself that question whenever we're dealing with things that's just in our heads. We don't know if it's real or if it's virtual or it's interception or it's deception. So that's the cross of the mind that we are technically locked into our willful purposes of wanting to find the answers leads us into rabbit holes of different technology that administers the minefield, because we're still on a large degree part of the main timeline, even though that we are trying to build the subsidiary code streams and code sequences into our energy system and our three lower fields. And until we have managed that completely, we will be on this switching between the main program and the subsidiary timeline, the main timeline and subsidiary timeline, the complex information patterns that are breaking down on the main timeline and the complex information patterns of the subsidiary timeline that fosters completely new mindset and different ways of perceiving reality, as well as different forms of work, sciences, and whatever we come up with. So the what we focus on, again, when we're on the subsidiary timeline should be scrutinized just as much as when we're on the main one. Everything is up for deception. Everything can be either a deception from technology or deception from energetic parasites or deception from within ourselves, our hopes and desires and needs for being this or that or whatever. So we don't really know, not now, not in the beginning of any project. It's the long term, the long run that shows us if we are on the subsidiary timeline. And that's in the amount of work that we produce. We can still be very productive in those completed deception. We saw Alice A. Bailey. She got a lot of downloads. Didn't mean it was the correct one, but it's still technology. Point being is that in the beginning of these processes, we don't know what's real and what's not. And we should not delude ourselves, and we should always do the clearing work and keep our feet on the ground and be very, very much observant of the double awareness and how we switch between the main program and being pulled back in. And again, what is connected to the main program and the main timeline of Phantom Earth, part of third cycle, and past Earth, part of the underworld, and what is unfolding into reality. And see and notice these patterns of change that are going into entropy and are going into more chaos-oriented breakdown possibilities. And that is what it is, and that is what will show and present itself. And then, of course, stay balanced. There's no point in getting angry with these dynamics because it is what it is. It's the main timeline has too many different types of human potentials and energy systems and extraterrestrial genetics and technologies and whatnot attached to it. So it has been overloaded. It's like a computer program that runs on too many different types of devices at one go, and it doesn't have the RAM or the processing facilitation to be able to run all of these minor computers on the same main program. So eventually the server will break down. So it's just that understanding that it's overloaded and hence it's going into entropy. It's completely out of balance with what it can hold as we say, kind of a server program where whatever's been linked up to it in all of these individual computers, they are all tapping into it, and it's not built for that enormous amount of flesh and that enormous amount of three lower fields and distortion and whatever is going on our planet. So that's part of some of the issues. So it's destined to go that way. And that's also when I said the event program, etc., etc. I'm tired of repeating myself, but that just goes into that understanding. And that's the clarity that we have to have, that we have reached the breaking point. There's no repair. It's just going one specific way. Not that we are going to fear or anxiety and tap into these chaos feelings. Of course not. But we are aware that this is what's happening. So we are not expecting something that cannot happen. We are seeing things as they truly are. We are seeing the changes in nature. We're seeing the changes in insectoid level and insectoid behavior. We're seeing the changes in the sun. We're seeing the changes in the weather patterns. And we're observing all of this. We can't do anything about it, but we can adjust to it. We can develop resilience to it. We can develop solutions to how to handle all of these changes in reality as we have been doing, humanity has been doing for a very, very long time. This civilization, this Holocene civilization, has learned to adapt to changes. The ones that survive the changes are the ones that continues into the next cycles, whether it's inside this reality field or another. And no, I don't want to recycle back into this reality field. That's not my goal. So point being is that, yes, on that scale, on that meta perspective, things are exactly as they've always been. We have had the rise and fall of civilizations. What we are to understand is that our global civilization is now in a fall process. It's not in a rise anymore. No matter what people tell you, we are going the other way. We have peaked. And we did not continue the peaking like a business that can peak, and then it should climb higher and higher and evolve exponentially into something greater. And humanity faltered, and we did not get that momentum, and it was taken away from us. Of course, within the next 4 years, the next 10 years, there will still be groups that will do a major turnaround, and there will be these future communities, as I talk about. In America, North America, there will be a future community around Maine. California will change into that after a very wild ride of disruption. They will get there eventually. And there will be these oases around in Europe, because Europe is not on the right trajectory either. So there will be these smaller communities. So the places that we are to focus on, those of us who are doing the subsidiary timeline, is not to expect the global community to adjust. That's not happening. Wake up. So what we have is to find our peers, to find like-minded people, and that's the next step of a very complicated journey. As 2029, next step, 2029 Facilitator, is to find our peers and the communities, and some of them we are to create ourselves. And that's the long-term work of creating and generating new patterns of change that leads to a minority within the human population that will choose to go that way and integrate the collective or the complex information systems from the subsidiary timeline and what you call exhibit that and put it into implementation within these smaller communities, whatever that may be. And a business is technically a small community too. So it's not just about where we live and live together. It is also about the businesses and the sciences and the laboratories, the science projects, whatever we come up with is technically a nodal point of consciousness and energy that are utilizing the energy units and complex information systems from the subsidiary timeline. So we still have potentials, those of us who are staying here for the remaining 40, 50 years on this planet as part of the main timeline. But we must understand that segregation will be the most likely outcome, and that implementation into the base program will be like all of the secondary groups that have been here inside the base program. They've been part of it, but they have been here, but they've not been part of it. They have had businesses here. They have run their subsidiary type of reality fields, relative reality dynamics. They have had their own groups they were trading with, etc., etc. And we can do exactly the same thing. That's still possible. But the energies we're utilizing cannot be from the base program because the reality field timeline that is connected to is breaking down. So we must understand that if we are to produce something, it must be from the subsidiary timeline through our energy system that's calibrated and aligned with the subsidiary timeline, through mental awareness processes that are aligned with the subsidiary timeline, through sciences that are aligned with the subsidiary timeline. And that means everything we know, we must literally put on a shelf, put in a box, and then start anew and learn everything from scratch that comes and are fostered by the complex information systems of the subsidiary timeline. So with that, I'll end this little podcast. Thank you.